China and Russia signed 14 agreements. Watch this space. In Moscow, Xi and Putin bury Pax Americana. This from the Cradle. In Moscow this week, the Chinese and Russian leaders revealed their joint commitment to redesign the global order and undertake that which has not been seen in 100 years. What has just taken place in Moscow is nothing less than a new Yalta, which incidentally is in Crimea. But unlike the momentous meeting of U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill in USSR run Crimea in 1945, this is the first time in arguably 5 centuries that no political leader from the West is setting the global agenda. It's Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin that are now running the multilateral, multipolar show. Western exceptionalists may deploy their crybaby routines as much as they want. Nothing will change the spectacular optics and the underlying substance of this developing world order, especially for the global south. What Xi and Putin are setting out to do was explained in detail before their summit in 2 op-eds penned by the presidents themselves. Like a highly synchronized Russian ballet, Putin's visit was laid out in the People's Daily in China, focusing on a future-bound partnership, while Xi's was published in the Russian Gazette and the RIA Novosti website, focusing on a new chapter in cooperation and common development. Right from the start of the summit, the speeches by both Xi and Putin drove the NATO crowd into a hysterical frenzy of anger and envy. Russian Foreign Minister spokeswoman Maria Zakharova perfectly captured the mood when she remarked that the West was foaming at the mouth. The front page of the Russian Gazette on Monday was iconic. Putin touring Nazi-free Mariupol, chatting with residents side by side with Xi's op-ed. That was in a nutshell Moscow's terse response to Washington's MQ-9 Reaper stunt and the International Criminal Court kangaroo court shenanigans. Foam at the mouth as much as you like, NATO. You're in the process of being thoroughly humiliated in Ukraine. And during the first informal meeting, Xi and Putin talked for no less than 4.5 hours at the end. Putin personally escorted Xi to his limo. This conversation was the real deal, mapping out the lineaments of multipolarity, which starts with the solution for Ukraine. Predictably, there were very few leaks from the Sherpas, but there was quite a significant one on their in-depth exchange on Ukraine. Putin politely stressed he respects China's position expressed in Beijing's 12-point conflict resolution plan, which was completely rejected by Washington, but the Russian position remains ironclad demilitarization, Ukrainian neutrality, and enshrining the new facts on the ground. In parallel, the Foreign Ministry completely ruled out a role for the US, UK, France, and Germany in future Ukraine negotiations. They're not considered neutral mediators. A multipolar patchwork quilt. The next day was all about business, everything from energy and military technical cooperation to improving the efficacy of trade and economic corridors running through Eurasia. Russia already ranks first as natural gas supplier to China, surpassing Turkmenistan and Qatar. Most of it via the 3,000-kilometer Power of Siberia pipeline that runs from Siberia to China's northeastern Heilongjiang province, launched in December 2019. Negotiations on the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline via Mongolia are advancing fast. Sino-Russian cooperation in high-tech will go through the roof. 79 projects, over $165 billion. Everything from liquefied natural gas to aircraft construction, machine tool construction, space research, agro-industry, upgraded economic corridors. The Chinese president explicitly said he wants to link the new Silk Road projects to the Eurasia Economic Union. This BRIEAEU interpolation is a natural evolution. China's already signed an economic cooperation deal with EAEU. Russian macroeconomic Uber strategist Sergei Glazyev's ideas are finally bearing fruit. And last but not least, there will be a new drive towards mutual settlements in national currencies and between Asia and Africa for Latin America. For all practical purposes, Putin endorsed the role of the Chinese yuan as the new trade currency of choice, while the complex discussions on a new reserve currency backed by gold and/or commodities proceed. This joint economic business offensive ties in with the concerted Russia-China diplomatic offensive to remake vast swaths of West Asia and Africa. Chinese diplomacy works like the matryoshka, Russian stacking dolls, in terms of delivering subtle messages. It's far from coincidental that Xi's trip to Moscow exactly coincides with the 20th anniversary of American shock and awe and the illegal invasion, occupation, and destruction of Iraq. Yeah, I'm of the mind that we should start calling that multipolar day, multipolar world day, maybe on the day of the Iraqi invasion, so-called anniversary. We should rename it multipolar world day because that's where it began. And well, either that or we could call the day that Mossadegh was couped in 1953 multipolar world day. In parallel, over 40 delegations from Africa arrived in Moscow a day before Xi to take part in a Russia-Africa in the Multipolar World Parliamentary Conference, a run-up to the second Russia-Africa Summit next July. The area surrounding the Duma looked just like the old non-aligned movement, days when most of Africa kept very close anti-imperialist relations with the USSR. Putin chose this exact moment to write off more than $20 billion in African debt. In West Asia, Russia and China are acting totally in sync. West Asia, the Saudi-Iran rapprochement, was actually jump-started by Russia in Baghdad and Oman. It was these negotiations that led to the signing of a deal in Beijing. Moscow is also coordinating the Syria-Turkey rapprochement discussions. Russian diplomacy with Iran, now under strategic partnership status, is kept on a separate track. Diplomatic sources confirm that Chinese intelligence via its own investigations is now fully assured of Putin's vast popularity across Russia, and even within the country's political elites, that means conspiracies of the regime change variety are out of the question. This was fundamental for Xi and the Zhongnanhai's, China's central HQ for party and state officials, decision to bet on Putin as a trusted partner in the coming years, considering he may run and win the next presidential elections. China's always about continuity. So, the Xi-Putin summit definitively sealed China-Russia as a comprehensive strategic partner for the long haul, committed to developing serious geopolitical, geoeconomic competition with declining Western hegemons. This is the new world born in Moscow this week. Putin previously defined it as a new anti-colonial policy. It's now laid out as a multipolar patchwork quilt. There's no turning back on the demolition of the remnants of Pax Americana. In before European hegemony, the world system AD 1250 to 1350, Janet Abu-Lughod built a carefully constructed narrative showing the prevailing multipolar order when the West lagged behind the Orient. Later, the West only pulled ahead because the Orient was temporarily in disarray. We may be witnessing a similarly historic shift in the making, trespassed by a revival of Confucianism, respect for authority, emphasis on social harmony, the equilibrium inherent to the thou, and the spiritual power of Eastern Orthodoxy. This is indeed a civilizational fight. Moscow finally welcoming the first sunny days of spring provided this week a larger-than-life illustration of weeks where decades happen compared to decades where nothing happens. The two presidents bid farewell in a poignant manner. Now, there are changes that haven't happened in 100 years. When we together, we drive these changes. Putin, I agree. Xi, take care, dear friend. Putin, have a safe trip. Here's to a new day dawning from the lands of the rising sun to the Eurasian steppes. In Moscow, Xi and Putin bury Pax Americana. In Moscow this week, Chinese and Russian leaders revealed their joint commitment to redesign the global order and undertake that which has not been seen in 100 years. And from CGTN, Russia and Chinese economies complement each other perfectly. Kirill Brybevs, the acting director of the Institute of China and Modern Asia at the Academy of Academic Studies, and a member of the Russian International Affairs. He's the writer of this article. On March 21, Russian President Vladimir Putin held talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping. This meeting was anticipated to be of a protocol nature and be limited to typical statements on a comprehensive strategic partnership and everlasting friendship. However, the meeting proved to have been thoroughly prepared in terms of content. The leaders discussed many precise initiatives that are essential for Russia's economy. It was a genuinely constructive meeting. In February 2022, the leaders of Russia and China published a statement establishing the principles of interaction and presenting a common perspective on basic concepts of the world order. Nowadays, this foundation is guiding the bilateral partnership. It's raised very specific issues, projects, and industries in which Russia and China interact and plan to boost cooperation. It's now time to implement these intentions, but at least the fact that both presidents are committed to profound and concrete partnership is obvious to the world. The mutual statement covered the main spheres for further interaction. Energy cooperation will obviously expand. The leaders have discussed it many times, and the projects have already been launched. The power of Siberia and the new Soyuz Vostok gas pipeline will increase trade in gas, as well as agreements between Rosneft and CNPC, which will bolster oil supplies. However, it's noteworthy that the statement also indicated the main problem areas of bilateral relations, such as logistics, payments in national currencies, localization of production, and e-commerce. These are issues that require the serious participation of both governments, an impetus for business and enhanced regularity environment. The launch of these and their transformations into real projects will very quickly allow Russia and China to create a powerful infrastructure independent of external pressure, which will promote future trade and economic interaction in general. The Russian and Chinese economies complement each other well today. They're like two halves of a puzzle that fit together perfectly. Russia needs components and equipment, machine tools, and industrial goods to be independent of Western imports and fill the gaps that have opened up after the departure of Western companies. Because of this mutual necessity, China-Russia cooperation is mutually beneficial. However, it's important for Russia that Chinese corporations not only import goods, but also produce them in Russia. And this was emphasized in the joint statement. Today, not only are raw materials important to China, but also other Russian products. For example, agriculture was mentioned separately in the leader's statement. China is very interested in the products of the Russian agricultural industry. During the extended negotiations, a document was even signed on the creation of a separate directorate that will deal with soybeans. This is a giant market. It's very good that this was given extra momentum at the leaders' meeting. Secondly, the Chinese market is interested in Russia's chemical products, which are unstable if exported to the West. Therefore, Russia's interests with China also coincide here. The Chinese market is very important for Russian chemists. Finally, petroleum products and petrochemicals are equally important. It's important that the construction of plants to produce petroleum products takes place on Russia's territory in the Siberian and Far Eastern regions to meet the demands of the Chinese market, but at the same time providing tax revenues to the Russian budget. Today, leaders from China and Russia are looking at the medium-term perspective, and cooperation plans already cover the entire current decade. It's very important for China to look to the future with a sense of stability and confidence. Current relations between Russia and China give us all such an opportunity. From MENA FN, Russia-China's partnership in nuclear innovation, implications for global energy landscape. Russia and China have recently announced a partnership to deepen their cooperation in the development of fast neutron reactors for nuclear energy, with the aim of creating a comprehensive program that would shape the global nuclear energy sector for decades to come. This latest agreement was signed between Russia's state-run nuclear energy giant Rosatom and the China National Nuclear Cooperation, the CNNP, and covers key areas of cooperation such as the expansion of existing projects and the launch of new initiatives related to fast neutron reactors, uranium-plutonium fuel production, and spent nuclear fuel management. This announcement was made during a 3-day visit by Chinese President Xi Jinping to Moscow, where he and Russian President Vladimir Putin discussed various avenues of collaboration between their countries. China currently operates 5 Russian nuclear reactors, with 4 more under construction, making Russia the largest nuclear supplier to China. This long term nuclear deal between Russia and China is expected to have significant implications for the global nuclear energy sector as the two countries work to develop advanced technologies and expand their nuclear capabilities as part of this partnership. They'll draw up a roadmap for cooperation in the years to come, which could have a major impact on the future of nuclear energy worldwide. From Tasnim news agency, Russia, China to cooperate in developing fast neutron reactors in nuclear energy sector. Rosatom, Russia's state-run nuclear energy company, announced on Wednesday that Russia and China will collaborate in developing fast neutron reactors for the long term. Moscow and Beijing are deepening their partnership in nuclear energy and will draw up a roadmap for cooperation in developing so-called fast neutron reactors for decades to come. Rosatom announced on Wednesday. According to the company, the comprehensive program lays the ground not only for bilateral cooperation, but also will essentially influence the shape of the global nuclear energy sector, RT reported. The document signed between Rosatom and the China National Nuclear Cooperation or Corporation covers key areas and is focused on expanding current cooperation as well as launching new projects related to fast neutron reactors, the production of uranium plutonium fuel, and the management of spent nuclear fuel. The announcement of a long-term nuclear deal came among a raft of agreements presented during a 3-day visit by Chinese President Xi Jinping to Moscow. China already operates 5 Russian nuclear reactors and currently has 4 more under construction, which makes Russia the largest nuclear supplier to the country. Last year, Rosatom launched the construction of Zudabu 4 reactor and the Tianwan 8 reactor in the Jiangsu province in eastern China. The reactors will be powered by third-generation pressurized water reactor technology supplied by Rosatom, with operations set to begin between 2026 and 2028, according to the agreement. The cost of construction at each site is estimated to be $1.7 billion. Russia and China ties enter a new era as Xi meets Putin in Moscow. Xi signs an agreement with Russian President Vladimir Putin, cementing their no-limits partnership days after the latter was issued an international arrest warrant. China's President Xi Jinping has said he signed an agreement with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin, bringing their ties into a new era of cooperation, as the two leaders called for responsible dialogue to resolve the Ukraine crisis. We signed a statement on deepening the strategic partnership and bilateral ties, which are entering a new era, Xi said, following talks with Putin in the Kremlin on Tuesday. He added that China and Russia should work more closely to push forward greater practical cooperation. In turn, Putin said all agreements have been reached and that economic cooperation between Moscow and Beijing was a priority for Russia. The Chinese leader visited Moscow days after the International Criminal Court, the ICC, issued an arrest warrant for Putin for crimes committed in the neighboring country, where Russian forces have made little progress in recent months despite suffering heavy losses. The talks were intended to cement the no-limits partnership, the two leaders announced last February, less than 3 weeks before Russia invaded Ukraine. On the conflict, the Chinese leader said Beijing was guided by the principles of the United Nations and promote a peaceful settlement of fighting in Ukraine. We're always for peace and dialogue, he added. A joint statement included familiar accusations against the West that Washington was undermining global stability and NATO was barging into the Asia-Pacific region. Putin said a Chinese proposal to end the conflict would be used as the basis for a peace settlement, but that the West and Kiev were not ready yet. We believe that many of the provisions of the peace plan put forward by China are consonant with Russian approaches and can be taken as the basis for a peaceful settlement when they're ready for that in the West and Kiev. However, so far, we see no such readiness from their side, Putin said. China's proposal, a 12-point paper calling for de-escalation and eventual ceasefire in Ukraine, lacked details on how to end the war. The United States has been dismissive of the plan, given Beijing's refusal to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine and has said a ceasefire would lock in Russian territorial gains and give Putin's army more time to regroup. Responding to the meeting, the White House said China's position was not impartial and urged Beijing to pressure Russia to withdraw from Ukraine's sovereign territory to end the war. After the meeting with Xi, Putin accused Western powers of fighting to the last Ukrainian and praised the growing trade, energy, and political ties between China and Russia. Describing his talks with Putin as open and friendly, Xi reiterated China's neutral position on Ukraine and called for a dialogue. Kiev had welcomed China's diplomatic involvement, but said Russia must pull its troops out of Ukraine and underscore the importance of Ukraine's territorial integrity. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Tuesday said Kiev had suggested to China that Beijing join a Ukrainian peace formula to end Russia's war in Ukraine, but that it was still waiting for an answer. The agreement also pushed forward the planned Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, which would deliver 50 billion cubic meters, BCM, of natural gas per year from Russia to China via Mongolia. Putin said Moscow was ready to increase oil exports to Beijing after Russia, China, and Mongolia had completed all agreements on a planned pipeline to ship Russian gas. The pipelines gained urgency as Moscow seeks to replace Europe as its major gas customer. Russia news agency TASS reported that the two leaders also discussed the internet and agreed that they stand against militarization of information and communication technologies and support multilateral, equal, and transparent management of the internet. They support creation of a multilateral, equal, and transparent global management system of the internet with the support of sovereignty and security of all countries in the sphere, TASS quoted. The agreement is saying. Wow, very interesting. Unlimited possibilities. As a state dinner following the talks, Putin toasted the prosperity of the Russian and Chinese people. I'm sure that Russian-Chinese cooperation is truly unlimited possibilities and prospects, he said. Xi's state visit was a major boost to Putin as he squares off against what he sees as a hostile West bent on inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia. Samuel Ramani, the associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, told Al Jazeera that while Tuesday's agreement was not an alliance, it was very clear that China and Russia are coordinating on a variety of fronts. The meeting between Xi and Putin coincided with a rare unannounced visit to Kiev by the Japanese Prime Minister that underscored Tokyo's support for Ukraine in its fight against Russia's invasion. Zelensky posted footage of him greeting Japan's Fumio Kishida, whom the Ukrainian leader called a truly powerful defender of the international order and a longtime friend of Ukraine. Wow, interesting dig at the end as well regarding Japan and Ukraine. From Erdu Point, Russia, China to prepare roadmap on nuclear technologies of future cooperation, Rosatom. Russia and China will prepare a roadmap for the implementation of a comprehensive program of long-term cooperation in the field of fast neutron reactors and closing the nuclear fuel cycle by the end of 2024, Russian State Nuclear Agency Rosatom said on Wednesday. This program was signed by Rosatom and China Atomic Energy Authority on Tuesday within the framework of the state visit of Chinese President Xi Jinping to Moscow. The document is comprehensive and covers several key areas, including expanding cooperation in current projects, as well as implementing new projects related to fast neutron reactors, production of uranium plutonium fuel, spent nuclear fuel management, Rosatom said. And from ang.beta.by, Lukashenko explains West's ire over Xi Jinping's visit to Russia. While talking to reporters in the World War II Memorial Complex Kaityn on 22 March, Belarus, President Alexander Lukashenko explained why the West is enraged due to Xi Jinping's visit to Russia, Belta has learned. Alexander Lukashenko said, "We're confident we're moving in the right direction, at least as far as Belarus and Russia are concerned. We're moving where doors are open for us. If a door is closed, why should we try to force it again? They'll come to us. They're silently coming out of the woodwork to reach us, trade, and the rest. Europe already complains about America while encouraging Europe to enforce sanctions over severed ties. Americans tried with Russians very well and so on. It's a business, and these lousy Western politicians create this situation with one hand and use the other hand to try not to only talk to us fraudulently, but trade with us and develop economy. This is why we go where we're welcome. We're doing the right thing, but they understood that they had done the wrong thing as well. Alexander Lukashenko reminded us about his previous meetings with high-ranking USA representatives during Donald Trump's presidency. Back then, the head of state told them, "Are you totally crazy? Tell your president that they've done the best thing for us, for Russia, and for China by bringing us all together. You, the West, simply bring us together, and they'll not hold against the front." The U.S. President's former National Security Advisor Bolton repeated it today. This is why they're enraged. They understood that they'd done everything to unite the mighty, resourceful space and nuclear power of Russia with the equally mighty, full of human resources, future-oriented nuclear power of China. One can say it's already the world's top power. This is why they're enraged, Alexander Lukashenko said. And watch this space. Remember, your engagement through a like, share, or a sub will accelerate us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go